Well, welcome to the next episode of the Christ-Centered Cosmic Civilization, and we're continuing to think about numbers, mathematics, the deep geometrical nature of reality. One of the hardest puzzles or challenges in thinking about mathematics and numbers is to account for the reality or the origin of numbers, because if it's really about whether numbers are just something that's going on inside our minds, or are they actually real things that are part of the universe, numbers. Now, you might feel like, if you've never thought about this before, the idea that 1 + 1 = 2 is the easiest thing in all the universe. Everyone knows that 1 + 1 = 2. Well, that's true if we accept mathematics, accept the reality of numbers. Then if we have one thing and then we have another of those things, we now have two things. But that isn't at all philosophically obvious, because why you have one thing and then you have another example of it, and that's all you have. For those two things to cumulatively become a thing that's called two, for one example of something and another example of something to actually be something else that's called a 2 is not at all obvious. The world does not just tell you that that's the case. Are we imposing this fictional thing that we call the number 2 onto the world, or is there an inbuilt thing such that two things that are adjacent to each other or associated with each other actually have become something new, a number 2 of something? I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it's really the idea that why should grouping things not just be a group of things? Why should they become something like a group of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or something? Is that real? Or is that just something that exists in the heads of human beings, but has no relation to reality? So philosophers have found the origin or reality of numbers one of the hardest puzzles of all. And yet, if we think about it, this precise thing is addressed on the very first page of the Bible. On the first page of the Bible, the living God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, the creator of all things, teaches us to add 1 to 0. So it's the first day, that is day number 1, we're told, because there's just one of those days. There's one. There were 0 days, now there's 1 day. And then on the next day, the second day, it's like there was evening and morning. That's another one of those days. But now this is the second day. So the living God is teaching us that, yes, add 1 day to another day, and this is now 2 days. It's the second day. We get more numbers. And he takes us through this process all the way up to number 7. For the first week, we are shown how to add one thing to another thing and get this third thing, and to just keep on going doing that. And he takes us all the way up to 7. And by implication, he's saying, well, you could just keep going. If you figured out the pattern, you're good to go. In other words, with the foundation of the universe, the living God gives us the foundation of numbers and mathematics. Now, not everyone's happy about that. Not everybody thinks mathematics is a good subject. It's often voted the least favourite subject by people in school. often because of the way it's taught. That's one thing, but also because of what people think it is. They think of it as something very disconnected to just normal, regular life. And as we saw in the last episode, actually maths is just incredibly basic to all we do all the time, the way we live. But many children even feel, oh, I just don't have a numbers brain or a maths brain. Even though they're constantly doing maths, they just don't realise it. C.S. Lewis, it was his least favourite subject at school. C.S. Lewis said, I could never have gone far in any science because on the path of every science, the lion of mathematics lies in wait for you. So for him, maths was like a fierce monster that couldn't be overcome. But let's just assume that the Bible opens in a good way and the living God says this is good, and at the end of the process it's very good. So let's trust this living God that for him to introduce mathematics to us, the reality of numbers and addition and so on, all in the first page of the Bible, that is telling us that maths is not taking us away from life and goodness. It's not a monster blocking the path to life and goodness, but it is actually the road, or part of the road, that takes us deeper into life and goodness. We mentioned the angels in Ezekiel chapter 1 in the last episode, but let's just touch on them again and appreciate how mathematical those angelic creatures are. These four living creatures who are like the personal bodyguard of the pre-incarnate Lord Jesus there in Ezekiel chapter 1. He's accompanied with them. And there are four of them, four being a number that represents the whole creation. I mean, we might come back to what each of the numbers represent in a later episode. But for now, just accept that the number 4 represents the whole creation, the points of the compass, north, south, east, west. There's the 4 winds that come from all parts of the earth and so on. There are 4 gospels to address the whole world. But anyway, 4, they represent the whole creation. And one of the things that most intrigued Ezekiel was the mathematical, or more the geometrical nature of the movement of these living creatures. The highest of the angels move apparently in only straight lines, no, not diagonally, not in curved movement, only in straight line movement, and they had these strange intersecting wheels. Listen, this is what it says in Ezekiel 1 from verse 15. Ezekiel says, "As I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the ground beside each creature with its 4 faces. This was the appearance and structure of the wheels. They sparkled like topaz, and all 4 looked alike. Each appeared to be made like a wheel intersecting a wheel. As they moved, they would go in any one of the 4 directions the creatures faced. The wheels did not change direction as the creatures went." Now, that's fascinating, isn't it? That they only can move in one of 4 directions, north, south, east, and west. And as they move, they don't move direction at all. So they don't move in a curved motion or even a diagonal motion. They just stay along these 4 planes of movement, and only in those. And from ancient times, artists, theologians, thinkers have been fascinated by this vision, because it seems to imply, why do they do that, the angels, given that the world appears to be not at all organised so neatly and precisely to us, the world that we see on the surface level doesn't have any straight lines hardly at all naturally around us. We can create them and impose them, but they don't appear to occur very often. But are we being told something about underlying order that's in the universe? See, that we seem to discover that the laws that explain the universe are in fact very simple and very neat, even though what we see on the surface does not seem simple and neat. But we know the laws that we seem to observe and discover seem to be incredibly neat and simple. And in that way, underneath the messiness of the visible world, could there be an underlying geometrically perfect order with straight lines, perfect circles or wheels, and everything neatly intersects and works beautifully together? Is this vision trying to show us how ordered and precise, well, certainly the angels are, and the angels that govern the whole universe, the heavens and the earth, the angels of fire and water and all nature and rivers and so on. These angels that govern all things seem to be extremely ordered and precise, and therefore the foundations of all reality has a deep mathematical structure to it as it holds together in Jesus. We could examine the beautiful geometrical movements that describe the orbits of the planets. You can look these up and you'll see beautiful diagrams that were the movement of the planets in relation to Earth and then in relation to each other is mapped. And you'll see incredibly beautiful geometrical patterns described by the movement of the planets, the movement between Earth, Mercury, Venus, such wonderfully ordered patterns. Just on Ezekiel and Daniel, in fact, because Ezekiel and Daniel are there in Babylon. And there are many ancient legends that the Greek mathematician Pythagoras learned mathematics and geometry from both Ezekiel, mainly Ezekiel, but also Daniel, when Pythagoras travelled to Babylon. So people often think of the Greeks as the people who really opened up and mastered mathematics and geometry, especially geometry. But the ancient legends are that Pythagoras, who's the sort of father of that whole movement in Greek thought, he got that way of thinking about the universe from Ezekiel. So even the great Bible commentator Matthew Henry writes this. This is a quotation from his introduction to the book of Ezekiel. He says the learned Selden in his book says that it was the opinion of the ancients that the prophet Ezekiel was the one that Pythagoras met, as Pythagoras himself narrates. And Ezekiel has his tutor for some time, and he attended Ezekiel's lectures. It's agreed that they lived at about the same time, and we have reason to think that many of the Greek philosophers were acquainted with the sacred writings and borrowed some of their best notions from them. Well, there we go. The prophets, Ezekiel, Daniel, giving this gift of mathematical and geometrical understanding to the Greeks via Pythagoras. And it's reminding us that mathematics and numbers have a deep connection to the most basic foundations of life in the heavens and the earth, physically and morally. As we saw in the last episode, Byron, he said, "I know that 2 and 2 make 4, and I'd be glad to prove it if I could. Though I must say, if by any sort of process I could convert 2 and 2 into 5, it would give me much greater pleasure." That's Byron, because he loved breaking the moral laws of the universe, and he wished he could break the mathematical ones. So it reveals, he also, in his sick way, is indicating to us that there's something moral about mathematics. The fact that the angels are mathematically and geometrical precise helps us to see that mathematics and numbers help to reveal the righteousness and power of the living God. So let's do an experiment to show this. This will be difficult to do only in audible form, but we'll try it anyway. And to do it, though, it would ideally work if you had a pen and paper handy to note down the way we're going to think a mathematical exercise, to show that when we do even quite simple mathematics and map that out visually, that connects to the physical world around us, and that we're trying to see if the one who designed the universe and holds it together is a mathematician. So let's do some addition in with a simple mathematical exercise. Some of you will know this exercise and will enjoy it. Others will have never heard of it, and it'll be quite a shock if we can make this work. Let's just begin. As we thought about there was the 0. There was once no days. Then the Lord said, here's the first day, day number 1. So 0 and 1, put those down on the paper, 0 and 1. And the only rule we're going to apply is, so then we've got 2 numbers, and all we're going to do is add those 2 numbers together to produce a third number. So let's do that. We'll add 0 and 1, and we've got 1, still number 1. So now we have 3 numbers. We have 0, 1, and 1. Okay. So the rule that we apply is we always add together the last 2 numbers in the set. So we've used 0 and 1, so that gave us 1. So now we add 1 and 1 together, and now we get the number 2. 0. So on our paper, if we're writing it down, we have 0, 1, 1, and now the number 2. Okay. So the rule is we add the last 2 of those numbers together. So we now add 1 and 2 together to give us 3. Okay. And then now we've got 2 and 3 to add together, and that gives us the number 5. Then we add 5 and 3 together to give 8. And then now you've got it. You could just keep going forever, couldn't you? 8 and 5 together to give 13. 13 and 8 together to get 21, so on. We can just keep going till we get very large numbers. We go to 21, then 13 and 21 gives 34. 21 and 34 gives 55. 55 and 34 gives 89. 55 and 89 gives us 144. Then 233, 377, 610, 987, 1,597, 2,584, 4,181, so on and so on. And we just very quickly get very big numbers. Okay, now that sequence of, why have we done that? And why have you written that down on paper? What's that for? What's the relevance of that? It's just a weird little mathematical exercise. Well, that sequence of numbers is known as the Fibonacci sequence, named after a brilliant Italian mathematician of the 13th century, Leonardo Bonacci. He lived from 1170 to 1250. Now, what's that got to do with the real world. Well, what we'll do is we'll turn those numbers into some geometry, into shapes. Okay, so geometries, that's a word made up of two parts, geo, earth, and metric, meaning measurement. So geometry means earth measurement. And it's interesting, earth measurement, because it's an area of mathematics that deals with very precise shapes, sizes, positions, volumes, and we're drawing squares, rectangles, triangles, circles. That's geometry. And yet, geometry is about measuring the earth. That's the name of it, geometry, measuring the earth. So this business with squares and circles and triangles, we just naturally go, well, that's just a kind of theoretical, abstract thing that maybe's in our heads or on paper. But how that can't relate to the real world. The real world isn't squares and triangles and circles and things. Well, okay, let's just see. So we've got our geometrical shapes. So we've our numbers, the 0, well, that's no shape at all. But then let's make one, there's number 1. So let's make a square that's 1 by 1, a 1 by 1 square. And then next to that, we make our other 1 by 1 square. So we've got 2, you might even draw these like 1 centimetre by 1 centimetre, or if you're old school, and there's good reasons to be 1 inch by 1 inch, what is called the imperial system of measurement, and that's a much more natural, godly way of measuring than the metric system. The metric system is very humanistically atheistic, really. It's a terrible system of measurement, the metric system. We might be able to get into why that is later. So I'm going to say let's draw them as 1 inch by 1 inch, because an inch is a natural created, divinely created form of measurement. But 1 inch by 1 inch, and then we square, and then next to that we make another one. So those are 2 adjoining one another, 1 inch square by a 1 inch square. And so the base part of that now is 2 inches long. But then our next square, if you remember, because our sequence of numbers is 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, something like that. So we've got 2 1 by 1 squares next to each other, and the base line of that is 2 inches wide. And that gives us the one side of our 2 by 2 square. So now we make a 2 by 2 square, and sitting on top of that 2 by 2 square is our 2 1 by 1 squares, if you've got that. If you're doing it correctly, that's what you should. So on your paper now, you should have 3 squares, a bigger one and 2 small ones sat on top of it. And then, of course, now let's say the right-hand side of that. So is 3 inches long, and that gives us the side for our next number square, which will be 3 by 3. So now we should have a 3 by 3 square, and then to the left of that, 2 little 1 by 1 squares on top of a 2 by 2 square. But now the top of that group is the 3 by 3 square, and then there's the 2 little 1 by 1 squares. So that forms 5 inches. And so we can sit the 5 by 5 square on top of it, can't we? And now we've got a big 5 by 5 square sitting on top of the 2 1 inch ones, the 3 inch one, and at the bottom left hand corner, the 2 by 2. But now the left hand line that's formed by the 5 by 5, the 1 by 1 and the 2 by 2, that's an 8 inch line, and that can form the first line of the 8 by 8 square that we need. Okay, do you see how it's working? these squares sort of begin to fit together. And each time we do it, we end up with a big long line that gives us the wall of the next square. So underneath, you'll see that the 8, the 2, and the 3 square form 13 to give us the basis of the 13 square. And then we can make a 21 and a 34 and so on. Excuse me. Right. If you've done that correctly, on your page, you should have a sequence now where the 1 by 1 squares are in the center of a geometrical pattern that's forming 1 by 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, and so on. And these squares are getting bigger and bigger, but they're all connected together. Now, they actually form a spiral. So if we wanted, we could start a curved line, beginning with our very first 1 by 1 square in the corner of it, and passing through to the opposite corner, curving round to the opposite corner, and constantly passing through the squares, describing a spiral effect that's beginning to emerge from a tight spiral at the beginning, and it goes all the way around, always passing through the squares from one corner through to the opposite corner. And then you just see a spiral effect that can be easily described with these squares. Now, why have we done that? I don't know how far you've taken it to 13 by 13, but you could keep going all the way up to huge numbers if you have big enough paper to do it. Now, why have we done that? Because that spiral that we have just created, that spiral shape, and if you haven't been able to do it properly, just look up a Fibonacci sequence just on the internet or something, and you'll find lots of examples of that spiral drawn out for you. This is the really weird thing. That shape that seemed just weird abstract numbers doing this funny little addition, just maths with a little bit of addition, simple stuff, is that shape, that spiral shape, occurs all the time in the natural world around us. In biology, in weather patterns, literally, that shape, that spiral shape, is all around the world, the natural world around us. So that the Lord, we know, it's obvious, it's proven that the Lord Jesus knew that Fibonacci sequence of maths, those numbers, he knew that. He thought of it, he invented it, that pattern of mathematics, and designed the physical world with those patterns in. The Fibonacci pattern of numbers appears in weather, stars, galaxies, ferns, plants, snail shells, wave patterns, the number of petals on a flower, spirals in a sunflower, or pineapple, the formation on a pineapple, pine cones, seahorses, unbelievable amount of things. All over the world, weather patterns, plants, animals have that Fibonacci spiral written into them. They're designed, in other words, by somebody who knew the Fibonacci sequence and thought it beautiful and thought that the world should have it in. It is estimated that 90% of all plants exhibit the Fibonacci sequence of numbers in their distribution of leaves. So, for example, this sequence doesn't only occur in spiral formations, but even the sequence of numbers of the way plants distribute the leaves and branches seems to reflect this. Now that's a lot for us to take in this episode, maybe too much. And if you need help with that, just look it up. Fibonacci sequence, Fibonacci. Please do it, because what we wanted to grasp in this episode is that though we are used to this postmodern idea that the universe and life and the world just doesn't make sense and there is no real truth, it's just my truth, your truth, and we invent our own meanings and so on. That is just ludicrously untrue. And that if we pay attention to the fact that the angels behave mathematically and geometrical, but so do plants, animals, weather patterns, even the galaxies, all obey beautifully maths, geometry. What we learn from that is that though we may have thought as we were growing up that maths was like an alien monster, something that, oh, I'm just not made for doing it. No, you are made for doing maths. And that maths has a lot more to do with worship than it has to do with exams and the kind of expectations or burdens that you may have thought about maths. Actually, maths has a better place in a cathedral in an act of worship. It's more naturally part of a cathedral's act of worship than it is in a classroom, in a school. Maths doesn't naturally fit in a classroom, but it does naturally fit in a cathedral. Well, next week we'll keep going into a bit more about Jesus as the source of all numbers.